Today, we've caught a Douglas in his natural habitat. What's this? Immature and Facebook. The dog in his natural environment enjoys such diversions. What's it like to be a Douglas? No one's sure. Mostly we figure Facebook and pugs take up his time. Speaking to a dog can be dangerous and may result in an overdose of pug pictures and Game of Thrones anecdotes. If you or someone you love suffers from being a dog, get help today.
Hello and welcome to episode 11 of the Drama Llamas. I'm Doug Urbanski.
And I am Claudia White.
Who the hell is Claudia White?
I just, thought it could use a little mixing up. Oh, I'm Stephen Jeffries.
How much sleep have you gotten, boy?
Throughout the whole week? Probably count on one hand. You don't want to know. It's been scary. But that is neither here nor there, nor anywhere, nor entangled in that massive lumberjack beard that you seem so keen on fertilizing.
You want to touch it?
That's
Careful.
gross.
It might bite.
Only if it transitioned into a bite. See? Transition?
I'm just thinking of all the ways to strangle you right now.
We looked at a section of conflict today.
And I agree.
In Agree, called Transitions. Surprisingly enough. And we can do those too. And transitions fix my hair automatically. So, I thought the first thing that I noticed was this seems remarkably similar to a lot of the things that we... Wake up. I'm leaving this in. So just talk.
Okay.
This is a special exhausted episode of the Drama Llamas with blooper reels left in. Because why not?
So yeah, transitions.
That was more of a jumping conflict, I'd say. Kind of out of nowhere. Wouldn't you agree?
Ow, yeah, sure. Anyway, so Egri tells us a little bit about transitions, and kind of brings us back to that whole idea of unity of opposites.
Yeah, like you mentioned when we were talking before we turned the camera on that it reminded you of the bone structure. The physical way that he sets up these opposing
Yeah, the way he
structures.
illustrates...
On 203.
Yeah, on 203. The way he illustrates the way the transitions kind of go from point A to point B to point C to point D to point E to point F to point... What comes after F?
G, I believe.
G. Yeah, like seeing that just looked a lot like... It was like a bone structure for a plot.
Yeah, friendship to disappointment to annoyance, and all that jazz, down to assault, premeditation, and murder.
Right.
And, yeah, I thought it was interesting how he ties these things together and makes it clear that they're connected, both by telling us in the text and by demonstrating this by the way he presents the information. But it never feels like you're reading the exact same thing. I mean, there are places where it kind of starts to feel a little broken record-y, but, repetition's not necessarily bad when
Right.
you're exploring something so friggin' difficult as creative writing, because, let's be honest, good creative writing is really hard. Like, even sucky creative writing is really hard. It takes effort. And to do it well, you really need to have some semblance of, how to put these things together. So, I really liked the way that he drew that. And he gives us a ton of examples. Like, especially with transition, I was really surprised by all the examples that he uses. He uses this growth between Manders and Engstrand in Ghosts. We get several pages of that, and then he jumps over, he talks about, Tartuffe, and goes back to several other places.
Brings us back to A Doll's House.
Mm-hmm. Right, and it really is nice to see it laid out. Theory's great, but it's nice to see something played out.
Yeah.
So you can watch the theory sort of unfold.
Right.
And with something like this, I think that's really important.
Yeah, especially a concept like like transitions, because you can't really do examples of transition in a single page. It has to be shown over time.
Right, because the whole point is it has to be gradual.
Yeah.
You can't just, bam. Like, one of the things on 221, I really, really like this quote. An almost universal fault of mediocre writers is ignoring transition, but believing their portrayals are true to life. It is true that transition can take place in a very short time, and in a character's mind, without the character being aware of it. But it is there, and the author must show it to be there. Melodramas and stock characters have no transitions, which is the lifeblood of real drama. And that reminds me of something I've heard in creative writing classes over and over again. Audience member says, "Gee, writer, I really didn't find this character or situation believable." And the writer, distraught, throws his hands up in the air, his tears welling up in his eyes, and he says, "But I fashioned that after Uncle Bob! He's a real person!" And it doesn't matter that he's a real person. We don't care that he's a real person because we were bored out of our skulls and Bob wasn't portrayed in a realistic sense.
I mean, when I think about it, I've thought about some previous playwriting classes I've been in, where a common compliment that people in the workshop issue to the writer is, "I thought your dialogue was really realistic and believable." And while that may be true, that didn't make it interesting.
Yeah, I think it's important to establish the difference.
Yeah.
Just, because believable is a word that gets chucked around so much. I didn't think it was believable. I thought it was believable. I think that there's a distinct difference between literal believability and dramatic believability.
Yeah.
Literal believability is, a lot more broad. Is sure, I can see two people sitting down and having a conversation over, like, the favorite scent. I like the smell of coffee. I like the smell of bay leaves. Ah. Great, we don't care. Unless, you're planning on choking someone or there's an allergic reaction. If there's nothing to make it interesting, then it doesn't matter.
Well, it's like, when you think about, like, our previous chapter, Point of Attack, like, if we see a conversation, this conversation is everyday conversation, starting out like, "Hey, how was your morning? I did da 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 da," and it just proceeds with that, almost template-like mediocrity.
Yeah,
It's why did we pick this moment to look at it?
It's like a story where the friggin' author decides to tell you how Bob's alarm clock woke him up. 6:27 p.m. He'd overslept again. He knocked the alarm clock from the dresser and begrudgingly pulled on his pants. And proceeds to tell us about Bob's morning, and how he brushes his teeth, and how he eats strawberry pancakes, and how his dog peed in his shoe again. And it has nothing to do with anything, but it's like this frame, this setup, this warming up, and it's to establish realism, because real people wake up and go to work. Yeah, but if it's not dramatically important, why do we care? So it's the same. Yeah, it's the same exact premise that you're talking about. Realistic doesn't necessarily mean better. So, it was actually. I was really surprised that it was more example than actual theory. But I think for this particular chapter, that actually worked out really well.
Yeah, it makes sense. And especially getting examples of where transition is not so good, like Chekhov's The Bear, in which we see, I believe Egri describes it as the transition being too obvious at the end.
The decision is so swift as to be incredible. Yeah. So, and I like that Egri's not afraid to point out famous playwrights and well-established plays and go, "Hey, this kind of sucked. This particular venue.
Not so good."
Yeah. It's nice to see that he's not afraid to look at both the classic, the well-established, and go ahead and say, "Yeah, he could have done that better." So I appreciate that. But I think now it's time to find something to knock myself unconscious with. I'm thinking good book. Applied to the forehead repeatedly.
Let me see your book.
Several times. What is it? It's a good book. I suppose I had that coming.